Hey guys, I'm the Depressed Engineer, and today I want to talk about before you go choosing engineering. So this video is going to be a little more targeted towards those who are looking to become an engineer or have obtained their engineering degree possibly and are looking for an engineering job. I'll actually probably create a video later where I talk about how I got my first engineering job, but this is for somebody who's looking into engineering and thinking, I could probably be an engineer, I'm good at math and science. I've already kind of gone over in my previous videos of what you should kind of expect in engineering. So there's definitely the school versus reality. So when I graduated college, I guess you can say I kind of went through post-college depression. And the best way to describe post-college depression is when you go through school and you do a ton of math and a ton of analysis and you created lab reports and built circuits and worked in CAD, or depending on whatever your discipline is in engineering, it is pretty much nothing like the real world. Now, if you're a computer science engineer, it might be a little more like that because, I don't know, software is just a lot easier to have on your computer. It's just something you're related to. Whereas, for example, my major is electrical engineering. When I actually got my first job out of electrical engineering college, I did a lot of troubleshooting with circuit cards. So that was actually kind of related to my major, where we would go in, look at ICs and capacitors, whatever products we're looking at, and we would do an analysis on whether or not that part's doing what it should be, whether the supplier supplied us with a good or bad part, or like a bad batch. So that I kind of lucked out on, where my major actually mattered. Here's the catch though. There was a disclaimer with that. A lot of the electronics I worked with when I worked at that job were around World War II technology. So there was a electromagnetic circuit that controlled the current. So if there was too much current, it would shut off. So with that product, I had no idea there. So in the design document, it was called, I don't even remember what it was called. It was like the electromagneto transformer. I don't even remember what the name of it is, but I went to Google search that product, and you want to know what it said? It said this circuit design was created for the V2 rocket from Germany during World War II. So there's the catch, is that I did not work with anything new. And a lot of what I learned in school was semiconductors, BJTs, which hell, even BJTs are outdated as well. But a lot of the stuff, majority of the things we learned were real world applications like electro-optics, fiber optic cables, learning how they worked, anti-glare monitors. We learned about those, and solid state devices. We even had to do a presentation on brand new solid state devices. So things like prosthetic eyes that could actually work for people who can't see. Things that were just really innovative and brand new to the engineering field. But at this new job, there was no new technology. And you can make the argument that, okay, well, it's good to get a foundation of some of those electronics at your first job before you start jumping into newer technologies. And I don't really agree with that. Especially as an engineer, you should be able to just jump into a new field and just start learning about it right away. Because as an engineer, you're supposed to be able to pick up things quickly. And when you're working with World War II technology, it's like you're working with something completely different from another world, because it's dealing with things you've never really had to deal with before. And the same electrical engineering concepts apply, but there's nothing to be passionate about for World War II technology, unless you're a World War II fanatic. Then, I don't know, maybe you go goo-goo over that's the kind of stuff. But for somebody like me, where I actually really like newer technologies and learning new things, it was just not really interesting. And I learned a few things, but what am I going to do? Learn how somebody from 1960 designed a timer circuit and then to apply that to a 2018 design, like, no, they have specific ICs that do that. You don't need to put 3 op amps together to do it. So things like that just got a little under my skin, and sadly enough, I didn't really understand how good I had it there. So just be warned that there's a very good chance that you're going to be working in mostly sustainment, where you're sustaining older technologies, and you probably won't even be working on anything new. Even if I had stayed at that job and became a senior engineer, none of the things I would have been working on would have been even remotely related to 2018 technology. Like, the closest thing would be an oscilloscope or a logic analyzer that we bought brand new from like Keysight or some other company, Tektronix, something like that. But, you know, that's just like buying a new computer. That doesn't necessarily mean you know how it works and how to develop it. It just means you have a shinier tool. And that would be the closest thing that we would ever get if I stayed at that job. So I had to move on, besides the pay and everything. And there's another thing you might have to learn outside of college is, so the national average for an entry-level electrical engineer is, you can look this up, it might have changed a little bit, but it's usually about $60,000 to $63,000. And my first job out of college was $46,000. And that was just a ridiculous low amount. Even if I'd stayed in Ohio and gotten a job, I would have at least gotten a $50,000 job. But I always hear students and people in general, they talk about, oh, engineers make so much money, and they really don't. Like, it's not much so what it really is when you graduate college and you get your first job, your starting pay is a little bit more than like a normal person's job. Or I shouldn't say normal person, that's pretty messed up, but like any other job market. So if you're an entry-level project manager, you're probably gonna make about $46,000, maybe even $40,000 at the lowest. Entry-level digital marketing, you probably make 35 to 40, maybe even 50K. So there's a lot of jobs that start out there, but engineering, there's a good chance that they'll actually start you off at about 60,000 and you'll be able to grow from there. But here's the thing about growing in engineering, and it's not becoming more technical, it's really becoming more sociable and being able to communicate with your team and your manager. Because as I said in another video, a lot of companies are looking for more engineers that are managerial types. They don't really honestly, and this is just my opinion, they don't really care about technical skills. Now, don't get me wrong, technical skills are very important, especially if you're in an environment where you're troubleshooting things. But honestly, when I did in Fort Wayne, there was one problem that I worked on that was really important, trying to save the company like $100,000 a month. And I had not originally found the problem. Somebody else from another department who was way more tech savvy than I was and knew way more than I did said, hey, I noticed this problem that we're having on this product, and it's because of this specific circuit. And he handed it off to me, mainly because he was rotating off to another internship, but also because it was in my department. So I took that task and made it my own and said, hey, we had somebody who found this issue and we need to fix this. And it didn't matter. No one cared that I was like, oh, well, actually the other person found it, so we should go ask him. It was, oh, Corey's trying to fix this problem. And so it became my issue. It was my task, and I was the one who received credit for it because I was the one who pushed for it and talked to people, and I talked to upper management and said, hey, there's a problem out here, we need to do it. And that's the only thing that managers really care about, is you pushing that. They don't care that some technical guy found it. It really doesn't matter all that much. So be prepared to try to really focus on your social skills and just become better at communication, because that's really the part that's really going to matter the most. So we've already got management versus engineering. You're probably not going to be working on anything new. And especially in electrical engineering, you would think that you'd be working with new hardware and doing intuitive things that made sense and actually lined up with this century. But the problem with electrical engineering is that there's a lot of defense contracting jobs for electrical. And a lot of defense contracting is just sustainment. And you're just going to be working with airplanes or technologies that were invented in the 1940s. And that's just the way it is, unfortunately. Here's another thing that kind of relates back to school. So when you're in school and you're trying to learn things, or maybe you're trying to learn engineering outside of school, maybe you're trying to take courses online. I don't know. There's so many different ways to learn, especially in electronics. But there's a lot of math involved. There's a lot of MATLAB. So there's some programming involved. And you learn, like I said, I learned about electromagnetics and electro-optics, things like that. And like these complicated tasks. And then you're probably going to get a job where a lot of things end up being really lackadaisical. And you're going to want to try to get as much work done as you can and try to push for more work. And it's just going to end up being really boring. And it's going to be pretty much nothing like you would think it would be. So you end up, honestly, I don't want to talk into this too much detail, just because I've already created a video about doing nothing at work. So feel free to check that video out. And that goes into way more detail about the effects of when you're trying to get more work done and the company just actually won't let you get more work done. And that's a weird scenario. Every time I say it, I'm bewildered by my own words, but that's pretty much what it is. Wow, my brain is totally scattered. I totally digressed. So engineers entry level will probably get paid a lot more than like entry level jobs in other careers. But here's the other disclaimer. The problem is you're going to plateau in your career. As an engineer, especially when it comes to raises, a lot of companies don't give you might get like the annual 2% raise. And when I worked at a certain company where I fixed a lot of problems and I said, hey, I think I've done enough things where I'm going to either get a pay raise or get hired on directly as an employee, and they just said no. So I just moved on to another company and got like a 20% increase in my salary. And that's another part, is you're probably going to be jumping jobs every 1 to 2 years, maybe 2 to 3 years, depending on how things go. And that's honestly going to be your best way of getting a pay raise. Because in engineering, even senior engineers, some senior engineers don't even make 6 figures. Could you imagine that? Where in, I don't know, digital marketing or like advertisement or any sort of business related career, where you work there for who knows how many years, usually about 3 years, and you're already considered kind of upper management, maybe mid-level. Now, mid-level management, you probably get about 90, somewhere in that range. It depends on where you live too, but I'm just throwing out these numbers that you can search on your own as well. So in engineering, you can work at a company for 10 years and have almost the same salary, because in 10 years, you'll get about a 10% increase, because you're getting that 1% each time, and maybe a little bit more than that if you get a 2% increase. Ooh. But even then, for 10 years, and you'll go from making maybe 60K to, I don't know, 70, 75. And that, don't get me wrong, that's still a decent pay. But in digital marketing, or even like business intelligence analyst, when you work at a company for 3 years, you can almost triple your salary. Like, it's ridiculous, the research I've done, where if you work for a company in business, and you also have to be pretty good at your job too, but in general, if you work there for long enough, you'll hit 6 figures really easily. And I've done research where there are senior principal engineers, and they still don't make 6 figures, and they've worked with a company for over a decade, and it's ridiculous. So honestly, when people say, oh, engineering pays really well, it's the upfront pay, and then over time you kind of stagnate. And that's where it goes back to my other video of, are engineers in demand? And the short answer for that is not really. So when a career is high in demand, companies will search the globe for somebody to do that job because they really need somebody to do the job and they have a shortage of people. Engineering isn't like that. Engineering is very competitive because the market's already saturated with engineers. It's very important to grab an internship when you can, because if you don't have an internship and you graduate, you could be unemployed for a year or more. You might just end up working in fast food for a while before you actually find your first engineering job. And that's a huge problem. Like, I would always recommend computer science engineering over electrical engineering now. And I always became an electrical engineer because it seemed more interesting with all the hardware, the capacitors, the inductors, the resistors, putting all that stuff together and creating a product. And 4 years of doing this, and I have not experienced anything like that at all. Whereas if I was a programmer, I'd be programming and I'd create a program. And I mean, I'm sure it would be a little more narrow and tunneled, where it's like, hey, I want you to make this program, but it has to be specific like this. And any job like that, especially in defense contracting, there's not a whole lot of room for creativity. So if you're trying to get into engineering to be creative and become an inventor, just invent stuff in your spare time, and maybe at some point you'll create a side business for a little product that you've created with an Arduino board, because that's honestly your better chance of doing anything like that. In engineering, there really isn't a whole lot of room for creativity. They just want to reinvent the wheel every time, copy and paste things that have worked in the past. And I kind of get it to some degree. It's like, hey, this isn't broken, so let's not fix it. But there are definitely ways to improve things instead of trying to fix it. But as I've said before, sometimes there's a clash between engineering and management. So just be warned that these are things you're going to run into if you really want to pursue engineering. And again, this is definitely going to come off as, hey, nobody should be an engineer, it's terrible. And that's not true. I'm just saying what I've experienced, and there's a lot of research that shows, especially in things like electrical engineering. Electrical engineering, the projected growth is stagnated and even declining. So people are predicting that in the future, electrical engineering is kind of like a dying field right now. Mechanical engineering is doing okay, and computer science is definitely doing well for itself. But like civil engineering does, I think so, it's like civil and mechanical are doing like average compared to other job markets. Computer science does way better than the other engineering disciplines. And then things like chemical and electrical they're not in high demand. And when something's not in high demand, your pay isn't really going to be as good as you think it is. Whereas if they have a critical need for somebody in a career, they'll pay the money to have you because nobody else has that skill. And some of these skills that you need, like digital marketing and things like that, you don't learn that in school. You might learn things that are kind of related to it, but you're almost better off just taking some online courses, figuring it out for yourself, and then getting a job out there. And even if the pay is really low, so if you get digital marketing and you're making like $36K or something stupid low, you can work there for a year or two and your pay is just gonna almost double. And I mean, do the research, just Google search it, and you'll find things that say, hey, a digital marketing executive or analyst or whoever, I don't even remember how the job titles work, but at least 1 to 2 years, you're gonna be making probably just as much as I make now. And then in another 2 years after that, you'll probably double your pay. So you might have to bite the bullet at first. And that's, I think, the most tempting part of engineering is the initial pay. But just remember that the initial pay stagnates and you have to fight pretty hard to get more raises because it's just so competitive. And since it is such a saturated market, if you ask for too much pay, like if you ask for a raise too often, or you reach a certain point, they'll lay you off. Like they know they can go get some fresh kids out of college to replace you, And they'll just do that because there's so many engineers being produced out of these colleges, and they don't care. They're like, oh, we're already paying you $90,000. Well, we'll just go hire somebody who will accept $80,000. And it just gets ridiculous because you need to really know your worth out there. And if you undermine and underplay your own skills, then you're not going to be paid as much either. And I get it. Engineering isn't necessarily about the pay. Like, a true engineer knows that it's always about the work, always about the discipline, and it's not about the money. It's about helping people. And that's great and all, except for the fact that I don't really help people at all, and I don't really do engineering as an engineer. So suddenly my mind is focused on money because I don't have those other things that I used to believe in. I used to believe in helping people and making life easier for others, and now it's died. Like, that passion has died for engineering. Whereas if I work on my 3D printer, I can at least, I don't know, create a Legend of Zelda trinket for somebody, and it'll make them happy for at least a little bit because they're like, oh, this is pretty cool. Thanks for printing it out for me. And they can paint it and do whatever they want with it once they have it. But as an engineer, especially in defense contracting, I don't ever really feel like I'm helping anything. And like the general idea behind defense contracting is that you're helping the United States through our military. But when you're sitting there working on a spreadsheet and all your boss does go, okay, that looks like a good spreadsheet, good job, that doesn't really feel like you're helping even the country at that point. So when those things are gone, you have no other option but to think of the money. And it's kind of a sad story, but I'm the depressed engineer. So what were you expecting? In any case, I think that pretty much covers the majority of the things that you need to know before you go into engineering. Just in summary, just know, just like any other job, there's never really a perfect job. Even if your job is designing video games or doing any of the fun things you can do out there, you will, at some point you get bored with it because you're doing the same thing over and over again. Sometimes you'll run into managerial issues where the manager says, hey, we need to do this, and you have a disagreement, and things just don't always go your way in a certain job. And so no job is really perfect, but just know that when you see these robotic competitions and these STEM initiatives to really push people to get into STEM, and you're building robots and building circuits and you're troubleshooting electronics, and they teach you things about, I don't know, things that have even been designed in the past decade, and it seems really cool. It honestly feels like they're tricking you, because I'm sure probably about 70 to 80% of you are going to get an engineering degree, and then you're going to get an engineering job and you're going to really hate it. Like, there's nothing to be passionate about, and there's nothing fun and exciting about going into the office, sitting there and writing up spreadsheets. It's not what you think it would be. It's definitely not as glamorous as as you think it might be. So again, I don't want to discourage people from going into engineering, because engineering is important. But we all need to be able to acknowledge the fact that there isn't a critical need for engineers. We have a lot of engineers, more than we can actually put into an office. And that's an actual problem. So if you really want to do something technical that's in demand, do like web development, because web development is high in demand especially cybersecurity is so important these days. I mean, look at Facebook and Twitter, and all these companies are looking for, oh man, we really need to protect our data. Data scientists, data engineers, anything that deals with software and data and websites and the internet, those are the things that are really needed right now. Because, I mean, look at what's happening in our world. People are getting hacked. People are selling data. It's getting really ridiculous, actually. So it's almost necessary for somebody to learn at least one language, because we're reaching the era of, the service industry where, I guess there's a little bit of product and manufacturing, but I mean, you really need to understand that programming is just becoming more and more important, and we're actually A lot of people get scared of programming, and it's really not that bad. And that's not to say that everybody should be a programmer either, because it's not for everybody, just like any other job. But those are the things that are in demand at the moment that actually deal with newer technologies, newer databases that are safer and more secure, and privacy issues. And there's just those things you should really look into if you want to be able to, if you want to actually create something. Because I don't feel like I ever create anything as an engineer, but when I'm making these videos and I'm editing things, I actually feel like I'm a creator, like I'm actually producing a product and I'm getting instant feedback on, oh, this is a crappy video or this is a crappy product. So it's just difficult to get that out of a real engineering job. Whereas when I do things at home, it's like, hey, I actually feel like I'm doing something to expand my skills or make somebody's life better. Things like that. So in any case, that's all I really want to talk about, guys. Feel free to hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet. Or else I'm going to keep ranting about it. Here's a good deal. If you don't subscribe to this video or to my channel, I'm just going to keep telling you to subscribe to the channel. And we all know how fun and not annoying that is. So in any case, so guys, I really appreciate your support, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye. I'm trying to think of how I should even start this video, because first job. All right, hang on a second. I don't know why my nose is crazy itchy. I really should. God damn it. Talking's hard, man.